So you want to learn how to use the Git Remote Add Origin command. Well, that tells me one of two things. One, either you've got a local Git repository and you're trying to connect it to a Git repository in the cloud, maybe one hosted by GitHub or GitLab or Bitbucket, or you've tried to do that and you ran into some problems and you want to know how to fix those problems that you ran into. Well, don't worry, I've got you covered in both situations. Hi, I'm Cameron McKenzie. I'm the editor-in-chief over at theserverside.com, and I have to be one of the world's biggest Git advocates. And one of the questions that I get asked very often is just how do you connect a local project to a remote server? And for years, I've been giving people the official answer. And just recently, a wave of guilt came over me because I realized there's actually a much easier way to do it. So in this Git Remote Add Origin tutorial, I'm going to show you the official way to add a local project to a remote server. But if you stick around, I'm going to show you the cheat. And quite frankly, the cheat, the easy way to do it, is the way I prefer to do it, and it's the way I typically always do it if the situation allows for it. Now, I also have to mention, there's really two scenarios that you'll run into when you use the Git Remote Add Origin command. There is the happy path scenario, which is when you've got a remote server on GitHub or GitLab or Bitbucket, you've got a remote repository that has nothing in it. There's no files, there's no commit history, there's not even a README. Okay? And then you've got files on your local file system in a Git repository, and you want to push your files to it. You want to connect to that server, set that up as your remote origin. That's easy to do. That's the happy path. And it tends not to be the situation that drives people to videos like these. The difficult situation happens when you've actually got a commit history in your repository on GitHub or Bitbucket or GitLab, and you've got a Git commit history locally, and then you try and connect your local repo to the remote repo, and they end up having disjointed Git commit histories, and the tool doesn't like it at all. So I'm going to show you how to do the Git commit add origin command in both of those situations, plus the little cheat, but we're going to start with the happy path next. So let's take a look at the happy path for the Git Remote Add Origin command. This takes place when you've got a remote repository with nothing in it, and you've got a Git repository in your local file system that you want to connect to it. So I guess the first thing I got to do is I've got to create a Git repository and project on my local file system. So I'm going to open up the Git bash tool in a folder called nothing, because it's going to connect to a repository with nothing in it. And I'll do the requisite git init command, and you end up seeing that .git folder created in the file system. And then, I don't know, what do I do here? I'm going to create a new file. I'm going to call this alpha.txt, and then you know the routine, git add git commit -m to create a git commit history. So I'll call that my first commit. And you should never put an exclamation mark in a git commit message, but oh, what the heck. And now I've got a Git project on my local file system with a Git commit history, and I want to push this up to the server. So we need now to create a repository on the server. So I'm going to click that beautiful green button there that says new over on GitHub. This is going to create a new GitHub repository for me. This could be GitLab, could be Bitbucket, could be code commit. And I'm going to call it nothing in it, because there is going to be nothing inside this particular project. The voids of empty space will have more in it than this project. There won't be a README, there won't be a git ignore, there won't be a license, there will be nothing. I'm going to click that beautiful green button once again that says create repository. I'll create it, and boom, we are done. We've now got a blank empty repository that we can now connect our local repository to. Now you'll notice that it actually gives you some instructions here. It says, okay, this is a strange situation. You've got a repository with nothing in it. You either want to add some files or maybe connect a local repo to this remote repo. And to do it, add a file, do git init, add a file to the staging index, do a commit, maybe change the branch to main because Git locally uses master. We're not supposed to use that anymore. But we'll leave it for this example. But that's a good thing to do. And then do the git remote add command and specify the Git URL of this repository. Every Git repository has a Git URL. There it is right there. I'm going to copy it. I'm going to copy it again. I'm going to copy it a third time. And then I'm going to come over to my repository here. I'm going to click Control L just to clear things up a little bit. And I'm going to do that Git Remote Add Origin. Paste in that URL, and that's the Git Remote Add Origin command. Now, just so you know, what that's doing there is that's saying, I'm going to take this local repository and I'm going to create a reference to a remote repository. It could be GitLab, Bitbucket, code commit, I don't care. It's just a reference to a remote repository. And you can actually connect to 5, 6, 10, 100 different repositories from Git if you want. And you can give them each a different name. If you connect to Bitbucket, you can say Git Remote Add Bitbucket. If you want to connect to GitHub, you can say Git Remote Add GitHub. Life is easier if there's just one central place to commit to. The standard name that we give to that is origin. But you could say Git Remote Add GitHub. And then the next time you do a push, you say Git Push GitHub. Next time you do a pull, you say Git Pull GitHub. So let's keep the standard here. Git Remote Add Origin. Now I have a remote reference to this GitHub server. With this remote reference configured, I can now do Git Push. Now, when you've got a new branch that doesn't exist on the server, you have to tell the remote server to get ready for a new branch to be pushed. So that's the -u, the -upstream switch that we've got there. We're going to push to origin, because that's the remote server. And the branch that I'm currently on is master. As I said, we should change that to main, but right now the default with Git when you create a new repository is master. So I'm going to do that Git push command, and let's see, boom, all of a sudden it says that has been pushed to the server, but I'm from Missouri. I want to see if that actually works. So I'm going to do a hard refresh over here, click that refresh button as hard as I can, and boom, all of a sudden, there we go. Alpha.txt is now up there on GitHub in my remote repository. I will now use the Git Remote Add Origin command to connect my local project to that remote GitHub, GitLab, Bitbucket, code commit repository. Now that was the happy path. Okay, what happens if you've actually got files on your local file system and the project on the remote repository has files in it as well? It has a Git commit history. That's where things get a little bit complicated, and that is what I'm going to address next. Okay, we took a look at the happy path for using the Git Remote Add Origin, but what if you've got files on the server and you've got files in your local Git repository and you want to connect your local Git repo to the remote repo? That becomes a little bit more complicated. So let's recreate that scenario right here. I'm going to create a new repository in this folder called something, and I'll do the git init command. That creates a new Git repository. You can see it right there. .git folder created. Then, I don't know, I'll add a new file called alpha.txt. Boom, you see it right there. Then the standard git add dot will add that to the staging index. Then git commit will commit it. So git commit -m first commit. Okay, and now if I do git ref log, you can see that I've got a git commit history on my local file system. Now, what if I want to connect this to a server in the cloud, a remote repository? That gets a bit more complicated if the remote repository has files in it. So I'm going to create a new Git repository. I'm going to call it something in it. And all I'm going to do is just put a README file in it. Like, that's all you have to do. Just add a README to it. That's going to cause a file to go into the repository. It's going to force a commit to happen, cause a commit to happen, not even force. If you really want to be crazy, you can add an Apache license. I don't care, but create that repository, and you'll notice that, boom, all of a sudden we've got a commit here, right? There's a Git commit history for this remote repository. So, how do we rectify this? How do we get our local repository to connect and move all of the files into this branch, into this remote repository using the git add origin command? Okay, so here's how you do it. So first of all, you'll notice that the branch on the server is main. We're supposed to be using the main branch. So the first thing we want to do is rename the master branch to main. And that's easy to do. All you have to do is say git branch -m, uppercase M is a force, and change it to main. and boom, all of a sudden you see that the branch has been renamed to main. The next thing you need to do is you need to add the remote repository as a remote reference for this Git repository. That means getting that Git URL that uniquely identifies that remote repository. So I click on the beautiful green code button on my remote repositories interface, click copy to get the URL, and then I do the standard Git Remote Add Origin, paste in that URL. And this isn't much different from before, but if I actually try and do a git push -u origin main, this is what we did last time, right? It worked. I think we used master last time, but if I try and do this, git push -u origin main, it's going to get rejected. And it's going to say, you know, the server, the remote repository, is a different commit history than the local one. And we can't understand that. We can't rectify that, right? There's no common ground between the two repositories. And so Git doesn't know what to do with it. So the way around this, and it might be rather heavy-handed, but it's to just add the -f switch and push with force. Here, I'm going to clear the screen and do this. So I'll click Control L. But here it is, git push. What was it? -u upstream -f force, politely of course, but a force nevertheless. Origin main, because I changed the master branch to main. And now, boom, all of a sudden, those files go up to the server. I come up to the server, I do a refresh. Let's see if we've got alpha there. Boom, alpha is there, but you'll notice that those other files are gone, right? We've kind of just forced our files on the files in the server. It's going to mess up the commit history. And more to the point, if other people have pushed and pulled to that repository, their whole commit history is going to be messed up. So if you're just doing this on your own, just trying to get things to work, you're not really worried too much about the history on the remote repository. You don't have other people that are collaborating on it with pushes and pulls and clones. This is fine. This gets it done. But you can see it's problematic when we've lost files here on that main branch. So there's two other ways to do this. One where you don't lose files. That's done with a rebase. And then there's my cheat method, which allows you to do it with a clone and a copy, which I think is super easy. But we're going to do the rebase next. Now, there is nothing Christian and wholesome about forcing a push on the remote repository, which is why I want to show you a slightly safer way to get your local project connected to a remote server in the scenario where both the remote repository and your local repository have files in them. So I've got a folder here called anything, and I'm just going to create a new repository in here, git bash here, and you know the drill, git init to create the repository, touch alpha.txt, git add dot git commit -m first commit. And now all of a sudden we've got a rich commit history over here on my local file system. Git log one line shows us that commit history, and the commit ID is CFA69EE. Now over on the server, I'm going to create a new repository here by clicking that beautiful green button on GitHub to create a new repository. I'll call it anything init, and I'm going to put in a README, and I'm going to put in an Apache license. Why not? Create that repository, and now I've got files and a commit history up on my server. Now, there is one thing to note here. If I click on the commit, you'll see the commit ID is 811C63C. That is the start of the history on the remote server, and if I ever want to push to that server, any branch that I push has to have that commit as the initial commit in its history. If it's not, I have to force the push, and that overwrites the history, kind of replaces the git commit history, which we don't want. We want to be able to take our local repository, add to the files that are already in this repository, and push, but keep that 811c63 commit ID as the initial commit for what we push to the server. You'll see that come up in just a moment. Okay, so in order to connect to this remote repository, of course, we need the Git URL for this repository. There it is right there. By the way, my cheat method makes this a lot easier, which is why I want you to stick around and see the cheat method. But I'm going to copy that Git URL and then to do the Git Remote Add Origin, paste in the URL, and now I'm going to do a git pull from origin, and I'm specifically going to pull that main branch now. Now, one of the ways that this works is because the remote branch is named main and my local branch is named master. Now, I mean, it's not that big a deal. You can do it without that, but this helps keep track of the fact that master is local and main is remote. So I'm going to pull that main branch down, which I can do after adding that remote origin, and you can see, hey, now you've got the main branch down here. And so what I want to do is I want to take the files from that remote server, and you can see that the remote repository has files named license and readme. My local repository only has alpha.txt. I want to get those files into my local repository, and I'm going to do that by doing a git rebase of that main branch onto my local server. Now, in fact, I have to say the main branch that I got from the remote server. So I say git rebase that main branch from origin onto my local file system, onto my local master branch. Keep your eye on the prize over there on the right-hand side where the files are, because you're going to see some things added there as soon as I click my enter key. Boom, all of a sudden license and readme are now added. So now I've got those files into my master branch. And let's take a look at the git commit history. Git log -- one line. And boom, what is the very first commit in the history of my local repository here? It's 811c6c3, which matches the commit on the server. 811c6c3. So now by doing a rebase of the commits from the main branch onto what I had in master, it puts that initial commit as the first commit in my local repository. And now I can push to the server without worrying about a corrupted commit history. Now, the only problem is if I actually switch right now to the main branch, so git switch main, boom, you'll notice that the file alpha.txt disappeared because alpha.txt is on master. It's not on main yet. So I can just do a git merge and say, hey, merge everything from that master branch onto main as well. Boom, that now gives me the alpha.txt file. I'm going to do a Control L to clear there. And the next thing to do is git push to origin. When I do this, all of a sudden the files get pushed to the remote server. I can come back to the remote server here, take a look at what's in there, and boom, all of a sudden I've got all the files from my local project plus the ones that were on the remote repository as well. And if I look at my commit history, well, you can see 811.636c3, you know the one I'm talking about, is the original one, which maps to what I've got on my client machine as well. So there you go. That's how you can do a Git Remote Add Origin and connect your local repository with files that are in an existing remote repository without having to do a Git push with force, without losing Git commit histories, and without losing any files. You might lose your mind a little bit with all of the rebases and pushing of remote origins, but that is the price we pay. Now, the payoff pitch is coming. The last thing I'm going to do is I'm going to show you how to do this so easily with a Git commit. Maybe I should have opened with this. Maybe I buried the lead. I don't know. But if you want to see the Mackenzie cheat method for getting a local repository connected to a remote repository when there's already existing Git commit histories in both, we'll stick around because that's what I'm going to show you next. So we've explored how to use the Git Remote Add Origin command, and we've even taken a look at some of the corner cases that arise and how to solve some problems that happen when you use that Git Remote Add Origin command, especially when there's a Git commit history on the server and on the client. But there's actually a much easier way to connect a local repo to a remote repository that doesn't use Git Remote Add. It's a bit of a cheat method, and I call it the Mackenzie cheat method. And all it uses is a clone, a copy, git add, git commit, and a push. It's super simple. So I'm just going to recreate the scenario that we had before, where I've got a project on my local file system. I'm going to create a new folder here called cheat, and I'm going to open this up, do the requisite git init, git add, git touch, you know the drill, git init, touch alpha.txt, git add, git commit. And now I've got a rich git commit history on my local file system. Git log, one line. There we go. Now I go over to my server, and let's say I create a new repository here, and I'll call it the Cheetah repo. Why not? And again, I'll put the README in it, I'll put a license in it, I'll create this repository on the server, this remote repository on the server. See, it's got a git commit history, it's got files in it. What I'm going to do is I'm going to copy the git URL like I did before, but I'm not going to do any Git Remote Add Origin stuff. I'm actually going to come down to my local file system, open up Git Bash, and just do a clone. So I'm just going to clone that repository, and boom, when I do that, you can see that that Cheetah repo ends up getting added over here. If I take a look at that Cheetah repo, it's got the license and the README, just like this has the license and the README. Now, watch this. I've got this cheat folder here. All I'm going to do is I'm going to copy all of the files in this folder except for the .git folder. You do not want the .git folder. That is the configuration for that other repo. But I'm going to copy all the files from my local repo and just paste them into the cloned repo. And now I'm just going to open up that git bash shell and say git add dot git commit -m, second commit, git push origin, and boom, all of a sudden, if I go up to the server here, you'll see that all of the files there, the license, the README, and alpha.txt, as it should be from the file system there. So as you can see, it was just, now I can just delete that other folder, right? That other project folder there. It looks like I got some terminal windows open here, so I got to do that. But now I can delete that folder, and all of a sudden the latest folder becomes the folder of truth. Try again. There we go. And now that Cheetah repo becomes a folder of truth. I just now point my IDE, Eclipse, VS Code, JetBrains, IntelliJ at that folder. I start working from that folder now. And that's it. You just git clone, copy the files from your existing project into the clone, push it, and now all the files from your existing project are up in the remote repository, and anybody can gain access to them. It's a total cheat move. It might not work with huge repositories. Like if you've got 10,000 files in your repository, you've got to merge with 10,000 files. But if they're relatively small repositories and the difference between the two is minor, copy and paste, push them over, do a commit, and do a push, and that's it. And that's how easy it is. So anyways, there you go. That's everything you ever needed to know about the Git Remote Add Origin command. Now, if you enjoyed that tutorial, why don't you head over to the serverside.com. I'm the editor-in-chief over there. We've got lots of great tutorials on Git, DevOps tool, Java, the new programming language, Mojo, which is set to revolutionize AI and ML. Lots of stuff on Scrum, lots of stuff on Agile. If you're interested in some of my other writings, there's a couple of books behind me there. One is Pickering is Springfield, which you can check out on Amazon, as well as Hibernate Made Easy. And also you can see the Scrum Master Certification Guide by Darcy DeClude as well, a young freelancer who writes for the serverside.com. If you're into Agile or Scrum, definitely check that book rock out. And of course, if you want to keep up to date on what's going on in software development, join and subscribe to my newsletter. There's a link in the description. We've got a Discord server for helping you learn new programming languages like Mojo, so check that out as well. And finally, you could follow me on Twitter at CameronMCNZ, but I'd love it if you just added a comment and subscribed on the YouTube.